The group of BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, are currently holding their three-day summit in Johannesburg. Altogether, these nations represent about 40% of the world's total population and about a quarter of the global economy. Well, one of the issues under discussion there in Johannesburg on this day two of the summit, enlarging the five-nation bloc to counter Western influence on the world stage. Well, the leaders of four of the five member states are there, as are the heads of state and government of some 50 other nations. But the Russian President Vladimir Putin, who faces an international arrest warrant, is not there. He addressed the summit via video link. Well, let's listen to what the Chinese President Xi Jinping had to say about expanding the bloc.
International rules must be written and upheld jointly by all countries, based on the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, rather than dictated by those with the strongest muscles or the loudest voice, ganging up to form exclusive groups and packaging their own rules as international norms are even more unacceptable.
The Chinese president speaking there. Well, let's cross to Johannesburg now and speak to Erin Bates, our correspondent who's standing by for us. Erin, Beijing, as we heard there, keen to expand the group's membership. Is everyone on board with that idea?
Most certainly amongst the five member states of BRICS currently, there is consensus on expanding the membership. The question is when and how and what will be the criteria for member states. If it's a haphazard band of brothers and sisters, it may not have the necessary clout that some of the member state leaders want for BRICS moving forward. And so determining the specifics of this increased membership of the bloc is something really on the agenda for these more private discussions between those heads of states in the coming days. It was Narendra Modi of India who also endorsed this quite clearly and squarely, an emphasis from Brazil's La Silva on the global south in his endorsement for expansion. We saw that as well from the likes of Russian President Vladimir Putin and of course Xi there. He also spoke about the changing times, something that South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa also referred to. Ramaphosa said the world is changing. Xi said international geopolitical situation is tense and BRICS countries should keep in the direction of peaceful development. Just to pull out quotes from those addresses earlier today.
Okay, so just tell us a little bit more about the key arguments being put forward for growing the BRICS nations group to beyond its current size of five member states.
Yes, Tom. Well, there it becomes important to note that there may be a strategic advantage for states, particularly on the African continent, for joining with the likes of Brazil, Russia, India and China. Of course, South Africa is the most regional player in the BRICS group. There, things like peacekeeping around the world becomes highly relevant. La Silva raising in no uncertain terms the Ukraine-Russia conflict and arguing that global bodies such as the UN Security Council have shown disproportionate interest and concern over that, him emphasizing a more even-handed eye from global bodies on conflicts around the world, for example, in the likes of Syria, Palestinian regions and elsewhere. And indeed, in terms of trade, things like waivers on certain tax provisions and also agreements between different nations. Ramaphosa raised this prospect of trade between Africa and the big countries in BRICS right at the start of things at the business summit yesterday. And certainly it does come down to numbers, but that's not everything. If you want a little bit of color, we heard from the likes of Modi that all five BRICS member states currently share a number of wild cats, and he's interested in developing some bodies to look into that. Also indigenous medicine, something Ramaphosa welcomed in terms of dealing with pandemics and other global illnesses moving forward, and indeed space travel. Ramaphosa mentioning to Modi that he's aware that there's an Indian spacecraft set to land on the moon today indeed, and that there's interest in looking into that. From Xi, just a last one, Tom, the importance of AI and perhaps developing a special unit within BRICS to look into AI provisions, regulations, and also development moving forward. Should be interesting.